"Daddy, can she be my mommy for just one day?" The words hit Edward like ice water in July. He froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips, watching his 7-year-old son Danny stare up at the woman behind the counter with eyes that held too much hope. For a Tuesday morning, the woman, tall, elegant, wearing a cream blazer that probably cost more than Edward's rent, glanced down at Danny with something between surprise and tenderness. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She looked like she belonged in boardrooms, not coffee shops in rundown neighborhoods. "Danny," Edward whispered, heat creeping up his neck. "We don't say things like that to strangers." But Danny wasn't listening. He was still staring at the woman, small fingers pressed against the glass display case filled with muffins they couldn't afford. "She smells like my mom used to," he said simply. "Like flowers and vanilla." The woman's perfectly composed expression cracked just slightly. Her hand, manicured and steady, trembled as she reached for her designer purse. Edward grabbed Danny's shoulder, mumbling apologies, but the woman raised a hand to stop him. When she spoke, her voice was softer than silk, with an undertone of something Edward couldn't quite place. Longing, maybe, or recognition. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked Danny. "Danny Martinez. I'm 7 3/4, and my daddy makes the best pancakes in the whole world, but they taste sad without a mommy to share them with." Edward's chest tightened. He'd thought he'd been hiding it better, the weight of single parenthood, the way Danny's teacher reports mentioned his longing for a mother figure, the quiet way his son watched other families at the park. The woman's eyes met Edward's over Danny's head. They were gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean, and for a moment Edward forgot how to breathe. There was something familiar about her, though he was certain they'd never met. He would have remembered those eyes. "I'm Olivia," she said, extending her hand to Danny first, then to Edward. Her handshake was firm but warm, and Edward noticed she wore no wedding ring. "Edward," he managed. "And I'm really sorry about." "Don't be," Olivia said quietly. "He's beautiful. You both are." The coffee shop suddenly felt smaller, the morning rush noise fading to background static. Edward studied Olivia's face, noting the way she looked at Danny, not with pity or discomfort, but with genuine interest. Like she saw him, really saw him. "Where do you work?" Danny asked. Because 7-year-olds have no filter for inappropriate questions, Olivia's smile was careful, measured. "I help run a company. Nothing very exciting." Edward almost laughed. Everything about her screamed power and success, from her posture to her watch to the way other customers automatically gave her space. This was not a woman who did anything that wasn't exciting. "Daddy works 3 jobs, Danny announced proudly. "He fixes cars and delivers food and cleans offices at night when I'm sleeping. He says we're building something good together, but it's taking longer than we thought." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken truths. Edward wanted to disappear, to grab Danny and flee before this polished stranger could judge their circumstances. But Olivia's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked impressed. "Building something good takes time," she said to Danny. "The best things always do." The barista called out an order, skinny vanilla latte for Olivia, and she stepped forward to collect it. As she turned back, she paused, studying Edward's face with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Have we met before?" she asked. "I don't think so," Edward replied, though something deep in his memory stirred. "I'd remember." Olivia nodded slowly, but her eyes remained thoughtful. She glanced at her expensive watch, then at Danny, who was still staring at her with unguarded admiration. "I have to go," she said. "But Danny, you keep being proud of your daddy, okay? He sounds like a remarkable man." As she walked toward the door, Danny called after her. "Will we see you again?" Olivia stopped, hand on the glass door, and looked back. For just a moment, her careful composure slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "Maybe," she said softly, "if you're very lucky." And then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of vanilla and the memory of storm cloud eyes. Edward stared after her, his heart beating strangely fast. Danny tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" Edward knelt down, smoothing his son's dark hair. "I'm not sad, buddy. Just thinking." But as they left the coffee shop, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life had just tilted off its axis. He had no idea that in 3 days, everything would change. Before We dive deeper into this story. Tell me, where are you watching from today? And when we reach the end, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 that Edward Martinez had learned to measure time in small victories. A bill paid on time. Danny's laugh echoing through their tiny apartment. A full night's sleep without nightmares about. Sarah's last days in the hospital. This morning felt different, though. 3 days had passed since the coffee shop encounter. But Olivia's words kept replaying in his mind. The best things always do. As if she understood something about struggling and building and hoping that most people in designer blazers never learned. Daddy, you're burning the eggs, Danny observed from his perch at their wobbly kitchen table, coloring a picture of what looked like a very tall woman with yellow hair, holding hands with two stick figures. Edward flipped the eggs quickly, salvaging what he could. Their apartment was small, one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for two people. But it was theirs, and after 18 months of sleeping in his car while saving for the deposit, it felt like a palace. Who's that in your picture? Edward asked, setting the plate in front of his son. That's Olivia from the coffee place, Danny said matter-of-factly. And that's you and me. She's really tall in real life. Edward's chest tightened. Danny had drawn pictures of mommies before, teachers, neighbors, even the lady at the grocery store who always gave him free cookies. But this felt different. More detailed. More hopeful. Danny, you know Olivia is just someone we met once, right? She has her own life. Her own. I know. Danny interrupted, adding purple flowers to Olivia's yellow hair. But she looked at us like we were important. Most people look through us. The observation hit Edward like a physical blow. How had his 7-year-old developed such sharp awareness of how others perceived them? And more importantly, how had Edward failed to notice that people looked through them? His phone buzzed. Another text from his landlord about this month's rent, which was already 5 days late. Edward closed his eyes, calculating in his head. If he picked up an extra shift at the garage and maybe grabbed a few more delivery runs. Daddy, are you sad about money again? Edward forced a smile. Just thinking about work stuff, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about. But Danny's expression was too serious for a child. Mrs. Chun next door says when grown-ups think too hard, their faces get wrinkly. Your face is very wrinkly today. Despite everything, Edward laughed. Thanks for the confidence boost, kid. After dropping Danny at school, Edward drove his ancient Honda to Midtown Automotive, where he'd worked as a mechanic for 2 years. The garage was located in an industrial district, surrounded by warehouses and office buildings that housed companies he'd never heard of. You're late, grumbled Frank, the shop owner, not looking up from an engine he was rebuilding. Sorry. Traffic was. There's a transmission job in Bay 3. Should keep you busy till lunch. Edward nodded, pulling on his coveralls. The work was familiar, meditative. Engines made sense in a way that people often didn't. Fix the broken part, replace what's worn out, and everything runs smoothly again. Around noon, a sleek black sedan pulled into the garage. Edward glanced up, wiping grease from his hands, and froze. Olivia stepped out of the passenger side, still elegant, but somehow more approachable in dark jeans and a soft sweater. Her hair was down today, catching the afternoon light. She spoke quietly to her driver, then walked toward the garage. Excuse me, she called out. I'm looking for Edward Martinez. Frank appeared from nowhere, suddenly animated. Ma'am, whatever Eddie did, I'm sure we can work something out. He's a good worker, never misses a... Oh, no, Olivia said quickly. Nothing like that. I just need to speak with him. Edward approached slowly, hyper-aware of his dirty clothes and oil-stained hands. Olivia, what are you doing here? I tracked down your workplace, she said simply. I wanted to talk to you about something. Frank was hovering nearby, clearly eavesdropping. Edward led Olivia outside, away from curious ears. This is about Danny, isn't it? Edward said, his stomach nodding. Look, if he made you uncomfortable at the coffee shop, he didn't. Olivia's voice was firm. Quite the opposite, actually. She studied his face for a long moment, and Edward had the unsettling feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. Edward, can I ask you something personal? He nodded, though every instinct told him to run. Danny's mother. What happened? The question hit like a physical blow. Edward closed his eyes, Sarah's face flashing in his memory. Bright smile, paint-stained fingers, the way she hummed while cooking dinner. Cancer, he said quietly. 2 years ago. Danny was 5. Olivia's expression softened. I'm sorry. She was an artist. Painted these incredible murals around the city. Danny has her eyes, her smile. Edward's voice cracked slightly. Her kindness. And her father? Edward laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm his father. Sarah and I weren't married, but Danny's been mine since the day he was born. She made me promise to take care of him, no matter what. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Softer. More vulnerable. Edward, I need to tell you something. But not here. Could we meet later? After you pick up Danny? I don't understand. Why, please? The word came out almost like a plea. It's important. Edward studied her face, searching for answers. All he found were more questions. There's a park on Maple Street. Danny likes the swings there. We could meet around 6. Olivia nodded. 6 o'clock. As she walked back to her car, Edward called after her. Olivia, how did you really find me? She paused, her hand on the car door. I have resources. What kind of resources? For the first time since he'd met her, Olivia smiled. Really smiled, not the careful expression she wore like armor. The kind that come with being very, very good at my job. The playground on Maple Street sat empty except for a few scattered leaves dancing in the autumn breeze. Edward pushed Danny on the swings, watching his son's legs pump enthusiastically toward the darkening sky. They'd arrived early, Edward's nerves making it impossible to wait at home. Higher, Daddy. I want to touch the clouds. Edward obliged, but his eyes kept drifting to the parking lot. What could Olivia possibly want to discuss that required this level of secrecy? And why did she look at him sometimes like she was trying to solve a puzzle? At exactly 6 o'clock, the black sedan pulled up. Olivia emerged wearing a long coat and boots, looking less corporate and more human. She walked toward them with purposeful strides, but Edward noticed the slight hesitation in her step. Olivia. Danny launched himself from the swing mid-arc, landing with practiced ease. Did you come to play with us? Something like that, Olivia said, her smile genuine but nervous. She glanced at Edward. Could we talk? They settled on a bench while Danny resumed swinging, now narrating an elaborate story about flying to Mars. Olivia watched him with an expression Edward couldn't read. He's remarkable, she said quietly. Yeah, he keeps me going when everything else falls apart. Olivia turned to face him fully. Edward, I need to ask you about something that happened 8 years ago. You would have been working construction then, probably downtown. Edward's blood ran cold. 8 years ago was a lifetime, a different person, different circumstances. Before Sarah got sick, before everything changed. How do you know about that? There was an accident at a construction site, a scaffolding collapse. Do you remember? The memory hit him like a physical blow. The sound of metal twisting, concrete cracking. The woman trapped under the debris, unconscious and bleeding. He'd been the first to reach her, working frantically, with bare hands until the paramedics arrived. The woman, Edward whispered. She was wearing a business suit. I never found out if she lived. Olivia's voice was barely audible. Because of you. The words hung in the air between them. Edward stared at her, pieces of a puzzle slowly clicking into place. The familiar eyes. The way she'd looked at him in the coffee shop. It was you. Olivia nodded, her composure finally cracking. I was 26, fresh out of Harvard Business School, convinced I was invincible. I was cutting through the construction site because I was late for a meeting, talking on my phone, not paying attention to the warnings. Edward remembered now. The blood, the fear in her eyes when she briefly regained consciousness. How young she'd looked. You saved my life, Olivia continued. I spent 3 months in the hospital. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, a shattered pelvis. They said if you hadn't gotten to me when you did, but you were unconscious. How did you? I came to for a few minutes while you were pulling debris off me. I saw your face. I remember thinking you looked like an angel. She laughed shakily. The doctors said it was the head trauma talking, but I never forgot. Danny's laughter echoed across the playground as he reached the height of his swing's arc. Edward watched his son, his mind reeling. I tried to find you afterward, Olivia said. But you disappeared. Different job, moved apartments. I hired investigators, but you didn't want to be found. Sarah was pregnant, Edward said slowly. We were trying to start fresh, away from my old life. I was drinking too much back then, making bad choices. The accident, seeing you hurt like that, was a wake-up call. You changed your whole life. Danny changed my life. And Sarah, they made me want to be better. Olivia was quiet for a moment, watching Danny attempt to jump from the swing. I've spent 8 years trying to repay a debt I could never quantify. I built my career, my company, thinking that success would somehow balance the scales. But nothing felt like enough. Your company. Olivia met his eyes. Sterling Dynamics. We develop artificial intelligence software for healthcare systems. I'm the CEO. Edward felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Sterling Dynamics was one of the largest tech companies in the state. He'd seen their logo on billboards, heard their name in news reports about billion-dollar contracts. You're not just successful, he said slowly. You're rich. Powerful. Yes. Olivia's voice carried a note of self-recrimination. And completely empty. I've spent so many years climbing ladders and closing deals that I forgot why I was climbing in the first place. Danny came running over, cheeks flushed from the cool air. Daddy, I'm hungry. Can we get pizza? Edward started to explain that pizza wasn't in this week's budget, but Olivia spoke first. I know a place. My treat. Oh, we couldn't, please. The word came out more vulnerable than Edward expected. I'd like to spend more time with you both. If that's okay. Danny was already tugging on Edward's sleeve. Please, Daddy. She seems nice. And you always say we should be nice to nice people. Edward looked between his son's hopeful face and Olivia's carefully neutral expression. Something had shifted in the last few minutes, some invisible wall coming down. Okay, he said finally, but somewhere kid-friendly. Olivia's smile was radiant. I know just the place. As they walked toward the parking lot, Danny between them, Edward felt a strange sensation. Like a door he'd kept locked for years was finally creaking open. Olivia, Danny said, slipping his small hand into hers. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you have any kids? Olivia's step faltered slightly. No, sweetheart. I don't. Do you want some? The question hung in the evening air like a prayer. Olivia glanced at Edward over Danny's head, her eyes holding a vulnerability that made his chest tight. I'm starting to think I might, she said softly that Romano's Pizza had the kind of worn charm that came from 30 years of family ownership and children's birthday parties. Red checkered tablecloths, cartoon murals on the walls, and the scent of garlic and oregano that made Edward's mouth water despite his nervousness. Olivia looked completely out of place and perfectly at home simultaneously. She'd shed her coat, revealing a simple sweater that somehow made her seem more approachable. Danny had already claimed the booth by the window and was regaling her with his extensive knowledge of pizza toppings. Pepperoni is classic, he explained seriously, but pineapple is controversial. Daddy says it's a matter of personal taste, but Mrs. Rodriguez at school says it's a crime against Italy. Olivia laughed, the first completely unguarded laugh Edward had heard from her. What's your position on this crucial debate? I'm Switzerland, Danny declared. Neutral but helpful. Edward slid into the booth across from them, watching Olivia's face transform as she interacted with his son. The careful CEO mask was completely gone, replaced by genuine delight. Switzerland, huh? Edward said. When did you learn about Switzerland? Olivia told me about it while you were in the bathroom, Danny said. She knows lots of interesting things. Did you know she speaks 3 languages? 4, actually, Olivia corrected gently. But who's counting? The pizza arrived. Half pepperoni, half cheese, completely perfect. As they ate, conversation flowed easier than Edward had expected. Olivia asked Danny about school, his favorite books, his drawings. She listened to his answers with the kind of attention most adults reserved for other adults. Danny, your dad mentioned you like to draw, Olivia said, wiping pizza sauce from her fingers. What do you like to draw most? Families, Danny said without hesitation. Different kinds of families. Some have mommies and daddies, some just have daddies like us. Some have 2 daddies or 2 mommies. Families are just people who love each other, right? Edward's throat tightened. Danny had inherited Sarah's open heart along with her eyes. That's exactly right, Olivia said softly. Some of the best families aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones you choose. Is that why you don't have kids? Danny asked with the innocent directness of childhood. Because you haven't found your chosen family yet? The question hit like a lightning bolt. Olivia's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Edward saw something flicker across her face. Pain, longing, recognition. Maybe, she said quietly. Maybe I just wasn't looking in the right places. As the evening wound down, Danny began to droop against Edward's side. The excitement of a new friend and late dinner was catching up with him. We should get him home, Edward said, but he found himself reluctant to end the evening. Of course. Olivia signaled for the check, waving away Edward's protests. This was my idea. Outside the restaurant, Danny yawned hugely and looked up at Olivia with sleepy eyes. Will we see you again? He asked, echoing his question from the coffee shop. Olivia knelt down to his eye level, her expression serious. Would you like that? Danny nodded emphatically. Daddy gets lonely sometimes. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. He smiles more when you're around. Edward felt his face heat up, but Olivia's eyes found his over Danny's head. There was a question in them, and something that looked like hope. I get lonely too, she admitted to Danny. It's hard being grown up sometimes. Then you should spend more time with us, Danny said with the simple logic of childhood. Daddy always says problems are easier when you have help. As they walked to their cars, Olivia touched Edward's arm gently. Can I ask you something? Sure. Tomorrow's Saturday. I know this is probably presumptuous, but I have tickets to the Children's Museum. VIP passes, actually. They're having a special exhibit on space exploration. She paused, suddenly uncertain. Danny mentioned he wants to be an astronaut. Edward stared at her. You bought tickets to the Children's Museum? I may have made a donation to ensure availability, Olivia said, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. Too much, didn't begin to cover it. This was a woman who probably hadn't set foot in a children's museum since she was a child herself, buying VIP tickets to spend time with them. It's perfect, Edward said, and meant it. Olivia's smile was brilliant. Really, Danny will be over the moon. As if summoned by his name, Danny perked up from where he was leaning against Edward's car. Did someone say moon? Are we going to the moon? Close, Olivia said, grinning. We're going to learn about going to the moon. The drive home was filled with Danny's excited chatter about rockets and spacesuits. But as Edward tucked his son into bed, he found himself thinking about Olivia's expression when Danny had asked about chosen families. Daddy, Danny's voice was muffled by his pillow. Yeah, buddy. I like Olivia. She looks at us like we're treasure. Edward's breath caught. What do you mean? Like we're something special she found and wants to keep safe. After Danny fell asleep, Edward sat on their small balcony, staring at the city lights. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for tonight. I haven't felt that happy in years. Olivia Edwards stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Thank you for seeing us. Really seeing us, her response came. Immediately. How could I not? You're both extraordinary. Edward set down his phone, his heart beating strangely fast. 8 years ago, he'd pulled a stranger from the wreckage of a construction accident. Tonight, he was beginning to suspect she might be pulling him from the wreckage of a life he'd convinced himself was enough. But as he looked through the window at Danny's sleeping form, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. And for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't sure if he was ready. The Children's Museum of Science and Discovery buzzed with weekend energy. Families clustered around interactive exhibits, children's laughter echoing off the high ceilings. The controlled chaos of curiosity unleashed. Edward held Danny's hand as they approached the main entrance, both of them slightly overwhelmed by the crowds. There, Danny pointed excitedly. That's Olivia. She stood near the information desk, checking her phone, somehow managing to look elegant even surrounded by children with sticky fingers and harried parents. When she spotted them, her face lit up with genuine joy. My space explorers, she called out, approaching with a warmth that made Edward's chest tight. Are we really VIPs? Danny asked, bouncing on his toes. The VIPest, Olivia confirmed, producing 3 special badges from her purse. These give us access to everything, including the planetarium show that's usually booked months in advance. As they moved through the museum, Edward watched Olivia transform. The careful corporate composure melted away as she got caught up in Danny's enthusiasm. She crouched beside him at the earthquake simulator, helped him build a tower in the engineering section, and listened with rapt attention as he explained his theories about whether aliens liked pizza. You're different here, Edward observed during a quiet moment while Danny was absorbed in a hands-on rocket-building exhibit. Different how? Lighter. Like you're remembering how to play. Olivia's smile was soft. I haven't been around children much. I'd forgotten how they see the world, like everything is possible, like wonder is the natural state of being. They watched Danny carefully attach fins to his cardboard rocket, his tongue poking out in concentration. He's lucky to have you, Olivia said quietly. You've raised an incredible little boy. Sarah deserves most of the credit. She had this theory that childhood should be protected, that kids should get to be kids as long as possible. Edward's voice caught slightly. She would have loved this place. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something personal? Edward nodded. Do you ever think about dating? Finding someone to share all this with? The question hit unexpectedly. Edward had been asked this before, by well-meaning friends, by Danny's teacher, by his own mother during their weekly phone calls. But coming from Olivia, it felt different, more loaded. I've thought about it, he said carefully. But dating as a single parent is complicated. Most women my age want to build something new, not step into someone else's story. And what if someone wanted to be part of your story? Not change it, just add to it. Before Edward could respond, Danny came running over, his rocket clutched in both hands. Look, I made it aerodynamic. He held up his creation proudly. The lady at the station said it should fly really far. It's perfect, Olivia said, examining the rocket with serious attention. What are you going to name it? Danny considered this gravely. The Sarah, he said finally, after my mom, so she can see space too. The words hit Edward like a physical blow. Olivia's hand found his arm, a gentle pressure that anchored him. That's beautiful, Danny, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She'll have the best view of all. They moved to the planetarium for the afternoon show. In the darkness, surrounded by projected stars and nebulae, Danny sat between Edward and Olivia, his small hand finding hers during the segment about black holes. Don't worry, he whispered to her. They're only scary if you don't understand them. Edward felt Olivia's sharp intake of breath. When the lights came up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. After the museum, they walked to a nearby park. Danny ran ahead to the playground while Edward and Olivia settled on a bench, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Thank you, Edward said. For today, for the tickets, for seeing him the way you do. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Olivia's voice was quiet. I've spent so many years building a career, accumulating success, but I've never felt as accomplished as I did watching Danny's face light up today. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Danny navigate the monkey bars with determined focus. Edward, Olivia said suddenly, there's something I need to tell you. Something in her tone made him turn to face her fully. The openness from earlier was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. What is it? My company, Sterling Dynamics. We're expanding our pediatric AI initiatives. We need a location for our new research facility, somewhere central but not too corporate. She paused, gathering courage. We've been looking at properties in this neighborhood. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. Olivia, what are you saying? The building that houses Danny's school, the community center, half the affordable housing in this area, they're all owned by the same development group. And that group just accepted our offer. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Edward's mind reeled, trying to process the implications. You're going to tear it down. Not me. The company. The board approved it before I realized the full scope of what we were buying. Olivia's voice was strained. Edward, I swear I didn't know. When I found out yesterday, I tried to stop it, but the contracts are already signed. Edward stood up abruptly, his hands shaking. You're going to destroy everything. Danny's school, our neighborhood, the place we've built our life. I'm trying to find another way. Are you? Edward's voice was louder than he intended. Or is this what you've been doing all along? Playing with us, making Danny fall for you, while you plan to rip apart everything we care about. That's not fair. Fair. Edward laughed bitterly. You know it's not fair? My son asking a stranger to be his mother because he's so desperate for someone to care about us. You know what's not fair? Finding out that stranger has the power to destroy our entire world. Danny appeared beside them, his face confused and worried. Daddy, why are you upset? Edward looked down at his son, then at Olivia, who was crying. Now, silent tears streaming down her face. We need to go, Edward said quietly. Danny, say goodbye to Olivia. But why? Just say goodbye. As they walked away, Danny kept looking back over his shoulder. Daddy, what happened? Why was Olivia crying? Edward couldn't answer. He was too busy trying to figure out how he'd been so wrong about someone, how he'd let himself believe that fairy tales could happen to people like them. Behind them, Olivia sat alone on the bench, watching the only family she'd ever wanted disappear into the distance. The rain started on Sunday morning and hadn't stopped by Tuesday. Edward watched it streak down the windows of the garage, each drop like a gray tear against the glass. He'd thrown himself into work for 3 days straight, staying late, arriving early, anything to avoid the hollow ache in his chest. Danny had asked about Olivia exactly 17 times since Saturday. Edward had stopped counting after that. She's busy with work stuff, Edward had said, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated jobs. But Danny wasn't fooled. He'd grown quiet, his usual chatter replaced by thoughtful silences. This morning he'd handed Edward a new drawing. Olivia standing alone under a dark cloud while he and Edward stood under sunshine. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, people shouldn't be sad alone. The wisdom of children could be devastating. Edward was elbow deep in an engine when Frank appeared beside him, holding a steaming cup of coffee and wearing an expression that meant business. "You've been moping for 3 days," Frank said without preamble. "It's affecting your work. My work's fine, your work's fine, but you're not. Whatever happened with that fancy lady, you need to deal with it." Edward straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's complicated. Most good things are." Frank handed him the coffee. "You know what's not complicated? That kid of yours asking me yesterday if I thought his daddy was sad because Olivia didn't like them anymore." The words hit like a punch to the gut. "Danny asked you that. Kid's worried about you. Says you're doing that thing again where you pretend everything's fine, but your eyes look tired." Edward closed his eyes. He'd thought he was protecting Danny by not explaining the full situation, but apparently he was just transferring his own pain onto his son. "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. If someone you cared about did something that hurt you, but they didn't mean to hurt you, and they were trying to fix it, would you let them try?" Frank studied him for a long moment. "Depends. Do they care about you back?" "I thought they did. But now you don't know?" Edward considered this. Olivia's tears had seemed genuine. The way she'd looked at Danny, the joy in her face during their museum visit, that hadn't felt like performance. "No," he said slowly. "I think they do care. I think. That's what makes it hurt so much. Then you're an idiot if you don't at least listen to what they have to say." Before Edward could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Danny left his rocket at the museum. "I have it. I also have a proposal that might interest you. Can we meet? Just to talk." Olivia Edwards stared at the message for a long time. Danny had been heartbroken about losing the rocket, the one he'd named after Sarah. Edward had planned to take him back to the museum to look for it over the weekend. He typed back slowly. "What kind of proposal?" The response came immediately, the kind that requires trust and hope. "Meet me at the coffee shop where we first met. 1 hour." Edward looked at Frank, who was reading over his shoulder without shame. "Go," Frank said. "I'll cover your shift." "But Eddie." "Yeah. Don't let pride cost you something good. You've had enough loss for one lifetime." The coffee shop was nearly empty in the late afternoon lull. Olivia sat at the same table where Danny had first approached her, 2 cups of coffee growing cold in front of her. She looked different, tired, vulnerable, her usual polish replaced by something rawer and more real. Edward slid into the seat across from her, noting the thick folder beside her elbow and Danny's cardboard rocket carefully placed on the table between them. "Thank you for coming," Olivia said, her voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would. Danny's been asking about his rocket." Edward's tone was carefully neutral, but his eyes lingered on her face. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Edward, I need you to know that I had no idea about the development project when I first met you. When I tracked you down, it was purely personal, trying to find the man who saved my life." Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. "But I understand why you don't believe me." "It doesn't matter what I believe," Edward said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The result is the same. Danny's school, our neighborhood, what if it wasn't?" Olivia interrupted, pushing the folder toward him. "What if there was another way?" Edward stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "What do you mean?" "Open it." Inside were architectural plans, financial projections, and legal documents that made Edward's head spin. But one phrase jumped out at him: Community Integration Initiative. I don't understand, he said, looking up at her. Olivia leaned forward, and for the first time since he'd sat down, there was fire in her eyes. Instead of tearing down the existing buildings, we integrate them. The school becomes our educational outreach center. The community center gets expanded and modernized. The affordable housing gets renovated, not demolished. Edward flipped through the pages, his heart starting to race. This would cost 3 times the original budget, maybe 4 times. Olivia's smile was shaky but determined. The board thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? Probably. She laughed, and it sounded almost hysterical. I presented this to the board yesterday. They're giving me 30 days to prove the community integration model can work, or they're moving forward with the original demolition plan. Edward studied the documents more carefully. The plans were impressive, a seamless blend of modern technology and community preservation. But the financial implications were staggering. Olivia, this is your career you're risking. Your company. I've spent 8 years building a career, she said quietly. But the last week with you and Danny, that's the first time I felt like I was building a life. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. There's more. Olivia continued, pulling out another document. The community integration model requires a local liaison, someone who understands the neighborhood, who the residents trust. She met his eyes. Someone who believes in building things instead of just fixing what's broken. Edward's breath caught. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Help me save your neighborhood. And in return, Sterling Dynamics funds a new position, Director of Community Relations. Full benefits, salary that would let you stop working 3 jobs. She paused. And Danny could attend the new STEM Academy we'd establish at his school. Edward stared at her, his mind reeling. Why? Why risk everything for us? Olivia's composure finally cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Because 8 years ago, you saved my life without asking for anything in return. Because your son looks at the world like it's full of magic, and he's taught me to see it that way too. Because when I'm with you both, I remember who I wanted to be before I got lost in who I thought I had to become. Edward felt his own eyes burning. Olivia, and because I'm falling in love with both of you, she whispered. And I can't bear the thought of being the reason you have to start over again. The coffee shop fell silent around them. Edward looked at this brilliant, powerful woman who was willing to risk everything she'd built for a chance to build something better. Something real. If I say yes, he said slowly, and the board rejects your proposal anyway, then we fight. Together. And if we lose, at least we lose together. Edward picked up Danny's rocket, turning it over in his hands. The fins were still, perfectly attached, the careful craftsmanship of a 7-year-old who believed in reaching for the stars. There's something you should know, he said finally. Danny's been drawing pictures of you. Pictures of our family, all 3 of us. Olivia's breath hitched. Edward, he asked me yesterday if people can choose their mommies the same way they choose their daddies. Edward met her eyes. I told him that sometimes, if everyone agrees, and if there's enough love, families can grow in unexpected ways. What did he say? He said he's been hoping really hard that you might want to be part of our story. Olivia covered her mouth with her hand, fresh tears streaming down her face. I do. God, I do want that more than anything. Edward reached across the table, taking her hands in his calloused ones. Then let's go home. Danny's been waiting for us to figure this out. The Sterling Dynamics boardroom had never hosted a 7-year-old before. Danny sat between Edward and Olivia at the massive mahogany table, his small legs swinging beneath his chair, clutching a manila folder that contained his very important business presentation. 12 board members in expensive suits stared at the unlikely trio with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed horror. At the head of the table, Board Chairman Harrison Wild looked like a man who'd swallowed something unpleasant. Ms. Sterling, Wild began, his voice dripping with condescension. While we appreciate your creative approach to community relations, we fail to see how a janitor, a child, and a sentimental attachment to a failing neighborhood justify tripling our budget. Edward felt his jaw clench, but Olivia's hand found his under the table, steadying him. With respect, Harrison, you haven't heard the full proposal yet. Olivia's voice was calm, professional, but Edward could feel the steel beneath it. And I believe Mr. Martinez and Danny have some insights that might surprise you. Wild's smile was patronizing. By all means, let's hear from our consultants. Edward stood slowly, his heart hammering. These people lived in a world of quarterly reports and profit margins. What could he possibly say that would matter to them? 3 weeks ago, I was a mechanic working 3 jobs to keep my son fed and housed. He began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a room like this, talking to people like you. Several board members exchanged glances that said exactly what they thought of people like him. But I know something you don't know, Edward continued. I know what it's like to build something from nothing, to take broken pieces and make them work again, to look at a problem everyone else has given up on and find a solution. He gestured to the presentation materials Olivia had prepared. You see this neighborhood as an obstacle to your plans. I see it as the foundation for something bigger. Those aren't just buildings you want to tear down. They're homes, schools, gathering places where real community happens. Mr. Martinez, interrupted board member Patricia Wells, while your sentiment is touching, we need to discuss practical matters. ROI, market positioning, competitive advantage. Actually, Danny said, standing up on his chair so he could see. Over the table, that's exactly what my presentation is about. The room fell silent. Danny opened his folder with serious concentration. Ms. Olivia taught me that good business is about solving problems people really have, he announced. So I did research. Edward bit back a smile as Danny pulled out a hand-drawn chart covered in colored markers and stickers. The old plan says you'll make money by building a building that smart people will come work in, Danny continued, pointing to his drawing. But what happens when those smart people have kids? Where do their kids go to school? Where do they buy groceries? Where do they go when they're lonely and need friends? The board members leaned forward despite themselves. The new plan makes a place where smart people want to live and work, Danny said proudly, with good schools and parks and neighbors who know each other's names. That's what my daddy calls sustainable happiness. Harrison Wild cleared his throat. That's creative, young man. But I'm not done, Danny said firmly. See, I asked my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, to help me look up numbers on the computer. Did you know that companies with happy workers make 31% more money? And that neighborhoods with good schools make property values go up by 50%? Edward stared at his son, amazed. Danny, where did you? Olivia's been teaching me about research, Danny said matter-of-factly. She says the best business decisions are based on facts and feelings. Board member Robert Chin spoke up, genuine curiosity in his voice. What else did your research tell you? Danny flipped to another page, this one showing a detailed drawing of the integrated community plan. The old plan helps Sterling Dynamics for maybe 5 years. The new plan helps Sterling Dynamics and the neighborhood for 50 years. Plus, he added with 7-year-old logic, if you make people happy instead of sad, they tell their friends good things about you instead of bad things. That's actually a sophisticated understanding of brand reputation, murmured Wells, looking surprised. Olivia stood up, her confidence radiating through the room. Danny's research aligns with our internal projections. The community integration model doesn't just triple our initial investment, it quintuples our long-term returns while positioning Sterling Dynamics as an industry leader in sustainable development. She clicked through a presentation that took Danny's simple truth and wrapped it in the language the board understood: profit margins, market differentiation, competitive positioning. Furthermore, Olivia continued, we've already received preliminary interest from 3 major tech companies who want to locate satellite offices in a community-integrated environment. The waiting list for residential units is 200% over capacity. Harrison Wild was studying the financial projections with grudging interest. These numbers, if they're accurate, they're conservative, Edward said, finding his voice again, because they don't account for the most important factor, which is, Edward looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. When you invest in community instead of just real estate, you get something money can't buy. You get people who are personally invested in your success. You get workers who don't just clock in and clock out. They build something they're proud of. You get customers who become partners. You get a legacy, Olivia added softly, instead of just a profit statement. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Danny raised his hand like he was still in school. Can I say one more thing? Wild nodded, looking dazed. My daddy says that the best things happen when people choose to help each other instead of just helping themselves. Danny's voice was clear and confident. And my mommy, my first mommy, used to say that the world gets better when people build bridges instead of walls. He looked directly at Harrison Wild. Sterling Dynamics could build the biggest, most beautiful bridge ever. Wouldn't that be cooler than just another boring building? The silence stretched until Chun began to chuckle. Then Wells joined in, followed by others around the table. Well, Wild said finally, his stern expression softening slightly. I don't think I've ever been out-negotiated by a 7-year-old before. So, Danny asked hopefully, do we get to save the neighborhood? Wild looked around the table, reading the faces of his fellow board members. Slowly, surprisingly, he smiled. Miss Sterling, you have your 30 days extended indefinitely. Let's build that bridge. As the board members filed out, chattering excitedly about implementation timelines and press announcements, Danny launched himself into Olivia's arms. We did it, he shouted. We saved everything. Olivia spun him around, laughing through tears of relief and joy. When she set him down, she turned to Edward, her eyes shining. We did it, she whispered. Edward pulled both of them into his arms, feeling like his heart might burst from happiness. No, he said, kissing Olivia's forehead and then Danny's. We became a family. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of their new home, a renovated brownstone 3 blocks from Danny's school, close enough that he could walk to the STEM academy that now occupied the modernized building where he'd once worried about losing everything. Edward stood in the kitchen, attempting to flip pancakes while Danny provided running commentary on his technique, and Olivia read morning emails at the breakfast table. The domestic chaos was everything he'd never dared to dream of. Daddy, you're burning them again, Danny observed, not looking up from the robot he was building from recycled computer parts, a joint project between his class and Sterling Dynamics' new youth technology program. I'm creating character, Edward defended, scraping the slightly blackened pancake onto a plate. Character is good, Olivia said, looking up from her tablet with a grin. Character means they're memorable. Everything you two make together is memorable, Danny said sagely. Sometimes memorable good, sometimes memorable learning experiences. Edward and Olivia burst into laughter. Danny had developed a diplomatic way of describing their culinary disasters that would serve him well in whatever career he eventually chose. Speaking of memorable, Olivia said, setting aside her tablet, I have news. Something in her tone made both Edward and Danny look up. The community integration model is being featured in Forbes next month. 3 other cities have reached out about implementing similar programs. She paused, her smile growing wider. And the mayor wants to present Sterling Dynamics with the Civic Innovation Award at next week's ceremony. That's amazing, Edward said, moving to kiss her cheek. You've changed everything. We changed everything, Olivia corrected. All 3 of us. Danny finished connecting a wire in his robot and looked up at them with serious eyes. Can I ask you something important? Always, Olivia said, reaching over to smooth his hair. When people ask me about my family, what should I say? Edward felt his breath catch. They'd been together for 6 months, but they'd never formally discussed labels or definitions. They'd simply been living as a family, letting love define the boundaries. What do you want to say? Olivia asked gently. Danny considered this gravely. I want to say that I have a daddy who fixes everything and makes the best bad pancakes in the world. And I want to say that I have a mommy who's really smart and builds bridges and smells like vanilla. And I want to say that we're the kind of family that chooses each other on purpose. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Danny, are you asking me to be your mommy? For real this time, not just for a day. Only if you want to, Danny said suddenly. Shy. I know you didn't get to choose me from the beginning like most mommies do. Olivia slid out of her chair and knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. Danny Martinez, I would be honored to be your mommy. Not just for a day, not just for now, but forever. You and your daddy are the best choice I've ever made. Even better than choosing to be a CEO? Danny asked. Especially better than that. Edward watch the two people he loved most in the world embrace, feeling like his heart might explode from happiness. 6 months ago, he'd been a single father working 3 jobs and trying to convince himself that surviving was the same as living. Now he was part of something bigger, something beautiful, something that proved fairy tales could happen to regular people if they were brave enough to believe. "There's one more thing," Olivia said, pulling back from Danny but keeping hold of his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said that first day in the coffee shop." "What did I say?" "You asked if I could be your mommy for just one day." Olivia's voice was thick with emotion. "But one day was never going to be enough. So I was wondering if maybe you'd let me be your mommy for all the days. Every single one." Danny's face lit up like the sun. "Every day? Even the days when I'm grumpy, or when I forget to brush my teeth, or when I accidentally break things?" "Especially those days," Olivia said firmly. "Because that's what families do. They love each other through the messy parts and the beautiful parts and all the parts in between." "Does this mean we're going to have one of those ceremonies where everyone gets dressed up and cries happy tears?" Danny asked hopefully. "Edward." And Olivia looked at each other over Danny's head, silent communication passing between them. "Would you like that?" Edward asked. "Yes. Can we have cake? And can I be the ring bearer? And can we invite Mrs. Rodriguez and Frank from the garage? And all my friends from school?" "We can invite whoever you want," Olivia said, laughing. "It's going to be our family celebration." As the morning sun climbed higher, filling their kitchen with golden light, the three of them sat around the table planning a wedding that would be small but perfect, surrounded by the community they'd helped save and the love they'd chosen to build together. Later, after Danny had gone to school and they were cleaning up the breakfast dishes, Edward pulled Olivia into his arms. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. "When Danny asked if you could be his mommy for a day?" "Every day," Olivia admitted. "I think about how close I came to missing this. How different my life would be if I'd just walked away." "But you didn't walk away." "No," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "I walked toward something better, toward home." Outside their window, the neighborhood bustled with life. Children walking to the school they'd saved, families shopping at the market that had been renovated instead of demolished, workers heading to jobs at Sterling Dynamics. Community integrated campus. It was proof that sometimes the best business decision is also the most human one. That evening, as they tucked Danny into bed, he looked up at them with sleepy contentment. "I love our story," he said. "It's the kind where everyone gets to be happy at the end." "It's not the end," Edward said, kissing his forehead. "It's just the beginning." And as they turned off the lights and headed to their own room, Edward reflected on the miracle of second chances. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as a construction accident. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a child's innocent question. And sometimes it looks like a woman in a coffee shop who's brave enough to see potential instead of problems. But always, it requires the courage to believe that broken things can be made beautiful again. Now that our story has reached its happy ending, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Did this tale of unexpected families and second chances touch your heart? Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments below. I read every single one, and your words mean the world to me. If stories like this one remind you that love shows up in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another tale of hope, redemption, and the beautiful chaos of choosing family. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best things in life come disguised as ordinary Tuesday mornings in ordinary coffee shops, waiting for extraordinary hearts to recognize them.